Okay, so let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at what basically became a giant treasure hunt for Gen Z recently, the sudden, mysterious disappearance of Diet Coke from store shelves. What started out as dramatic social media posts about empty fridges and missing emotional support drinks actually points to a massive global supply chain mystery that we're going to unpack today.
So, where did all the Diet Coke actually go? Well, surprisingly, the answer isn't a lack of the soda itself. It's actually a lack of what holds it. Rising global tensions have caused supply chains to take a serious hit, leading to a huge aluminum can shortage. Domestic manufacturing units simply aren't making enough cans, leaving the market heavily dependent on imports just to keep soda on the shelves.
Now here is where things get super interesting. It's a massive paradox. We are heavily dependent on importing these cans, right? But India literally has enough world-class bauxite reserves, which is the raw material used to make aluminum, to last for a staggering 350 years. Throw in some of the cheapest labor rates on the planet, and man, this whole shortage starts to look incredibly confusing.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Great Aluminum Paradox.
Seriously, why is a nation that by all rights should be the Saudi Arabia of aluminum completely failing to make its own simple beverage containers? The irony here is just stark. India is literally the second largest aluminum producer on Earth. We are churning out 4 million metric tons of the stuff. And yet, when it comes to the tiny little cans that hold our drinks, we're relying on imports from places like Sri Lanka. It's a pattern we see across other industries too, but it absolutely exposes a shocking weakness in this specific growth story.
Moving on to Section 2. Who makes the real money?
Okay, to actually solve this economic mystery, we have to look at the aluminum industry as a multi-stage pipeline, okay? Because every single stage generates dramatically different profits. Think of it like a 5-stage funnel. The journey goes from bauxite to alumina to primary aluminum, which is then rolled into sheets and finally baked into those finished cans. Now, India is absolutely world-class at the heavy lifting, the really low-margin stuff, stages 1 through 3. But when it comes to the high-margin finished goods, those stages 4 and 5, domestic factories are running at less than a third of their capacity.
And the profit gap here is just staggering. Down at the bottom of the funnel, that raw red rock sells for roughly $40 a ton. But look at the top. A finished can sheet sells for $3,560 a ton. That is a massive 90x jump in value from the dirt at the bottom to the shiny metal at the top. The real money isn't down in the mine, it's up in the rolling mills.
So the absolutely crucial point here comes from a specific stat in Hindalco's Q2 FY23 earnings report. At that time, raw aluminum was going for around $2,367 a ton. But get this, the premium for simply rolling that raw aluminum into a sheet added another $2,510 a ton. Think about that for a second. The premium just for rolling the metal is actually larger than the price of the raw metal itself. Wild, right?
Now, let's contrast this with the United Arab Emirates. The UAE has zero bauxite, literally not a single gram. And yet they import raw materials from places like India, and then they leverage their cheap, stable electricity and zero political friction to totally dominate the highest margin stages. They have built one of the world's most energy-efficient aluminum hubs entirely out of the top of that funnel.
Let's look at the exact math of how this actually plays out. So, starting with 100 rupees of bauxite, India does 3 super heavy stages of refining and smelting just to add 560 rupees of value. Then, that metal gets shipped over to the UAE, where in just one single rolling step, they add 690 rupees of value before turning around and selling the finished 1,500 rupee can right back to India. The UAE literally does one step, but they make way more money across the pipeline.
Which leads us to Section 3, the 3-part policy trap.
This aluminum trap is basically a vicious cycle that is quietly suffocating around 3,500 domestic MSMEs who are just trying to make cans and car parts right at home. The trap is driven by 3 main culprits: import parity pricing, an 80% raw material cost burden, and a 0% duty on finished goods. These 3 policies, when you combine them, are exactly what's keeping our domestic factories struggling to compete.
Let's break down that first culprit. So the government levies a 7.5% basic customs duty on imported primary aluminum, and the goal is to protect domestic producers. But instead of keeping local aluminum cheap, the big 4 domestic companies realize, hey, foreign aluminum is now more expensive. So what do? They artificially raise their own prices to match those international premium prices. This little maneuver is what we call import parity pricing.
Now apply that logic to the second culprit.
Just imagine you're running a small factory in Pune. The aluminum itself makes up 80% of your total costs. Because of import parity pricing, that 80% is artificially expensive right out of the gate. Your raw materials are being priced as if they were shipped all the way from abroad. It completely wipes out your already wafer-thin margins.
And if you want to see why this is so incredibly damaging, just compare India's 7.5% raw material duty to the rest of the world. Europe is sitting at 3 to 6%, South Korea is at 1 to 3%, the US is under 2.6%. Foreign manufacturers literally have a massive head start on their raw material costs before they even flip on their factory lights in the morning.
All right, Section 4, the 10 rupee can problem.
Now let's bring all of this high-level international duty math down to the pocket change economics of a single 330 milliliter Diet Coke can. The shocking truth here is that a factory in South Korea can manufacture a can, ship it all the way across the ocean to a port in Mumbai, and it'll still only cost 9.77 rupees. Meanwhile, an Indian MSME sitting right there in Pune producing the exact same can needs 10.4 rupees just to break even.
Let's break down exactly how the Korean factory pulls off that win. First, they have cheaper metal costs because they buy on the world market without that 7.5% duty premium. Second, their manufacturing is cheaper. And then, here is the absolute kicker. Thanks to a trade agreement, there is zero import duty on the finished can when it arrives in Mumbai. They beat our domestic makers on price, all while taking a profit margin that is more than double.
Now, I know a 0.63 rupee difference might seem totally tiny, but scale that gap across 10 billion cans. For a massive company like Coca-Cola India, choosing the Korean imports over domestic manufacturing results in a mammoth savings of 630 crores. It is completely simple business logic for them, but obviously it's a massive, massive loss for domestic manufacturing.
Section 5, redefining self-reliance.
So what does a disappearing can of Diet Coke actually teach us about our broader economic growth story? Well, as the source material points out regarding policies like Atmanirbhar Bharat, simply having the raw materials in the ground is practically meaningless if you continually surrender the most lucrative, high-margin manufacturing stages to foreign partners. We do all the heavy lifting, and someone else walks away with the real profit.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly vital question. How will we actually capture the value that we already dig out of the ground? Because until a nation can conquer the very top of the funnel, it's just going to keep exporting its wealth, only to import empty cans. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we unravel another incredible story hidden right in plain sight.